Buonasera, benvenuti. Welcome. I am Massimo Gargiulo. I am the Vice Director of the Cardinal Bea Center for Judaic Studies here at the Pontifical Gregorian University, and I also bring greetings from the Director of the Center, Professor Etienne Beteau, who is now in Jerusalem for sabbatical leave. We are very honored to welcome you all here for this evening, an occasion to have a conversation on Catholic-Jewish relations, accomplishments, and challenges. For us, it is an honor to have been asked to host an event which is part of the American Jewish Committee 2023 program here in Rome. I am particularly pleased to welcome here Michael Tichner, the president of the American Jewish Committee, and Ted Deutsch, I hope I am pronouncing well his name, the CEO of the American Jewish Committee, and Amy Ragen, chairman of Interreligious Relations. Also, I am very happy to welcome here His Excellency John Donnelly, the ambassador of the United States to the Holy See, His Excellency Bishop Brian Farrell, Secretary of the Dicastery for Promoting Christian Unity and Vice President of the Holy See Commission for Religious Relations with Judaism, Reverend Father Norbert Hoffman, Secretary of the same Commission, Reverend Father Giuliano Savina, Director of the National Office for Ecumenism and Interreligious Dialogue of the Italian Episcopal Conference, and Director of the Pontifical Biblical Institute, Professor Michael Kolarczyk. Our welcome goes to all the colleagues, students, and friends who honor us with their presence. And of course, it is a real privilege to have here our two speakers, Rabbi David Rosen and Fra Giulio Michelini. Rabbi Rosen and Ms. Lisa Palmieri have a long friendship on behalf of the American Jewish Committee with the Cardinal Bea Center, and we hope that this collaboration will continue for a long time. Over the past weeks, we have worked closely together to organize this event, and my thanks go to them. We'll have two parts this evening. In the first, we'll have a time of questions and answers with our guest, moderated by Father Philip Renches, the Dean of the Faculty of Theology here at the Gregorian University. Thank you, Father Renches, for accepting. At the end, some conclusive remarks will be made by Emily Cohen. In the second part, we will move the dialogue to the gastronomic field, and we'll have a buffet just here in the atria. Last but not least, let me thank Federica Sozzi and Erminia Sant'Angelo for their precious collaboration in organizing today's event. Before starting, I leave the word to Richard Cohen of the AGC. Benvenuti ancora a tutti.
Thank you, Professor Gargiulo. Rabbi Rosen, Professors Michelini and Renches, it is my great honor to introduce this program on behalf of the American Jewish Committee, the 117-year-old worldwide leader in Jewish diplomacy with offices around the world. Professor Gargiulo already mentioned we have our worldwide Chief Executive, Ted Deutsch, and our worldwide President, Michael Tichner, as well as our Interreligious Affairs Chair from Seattle, Washington, Amy Reagan-Levin. We have an esteemed audience here tonight. We are here to discuss Jewish-Catholic relations, the dialogue that is been going on for our 117-year existence, and most notably in the last 58 years since the adoption of Nostra Aetate, which is a beautiful document of the relationship between Jews and Catholics, but we are here tonight to breathe further life into it. We are all here saying a prayer today for Pope Francis, whom we had hoped to meet with today, but who we understand we cannot, and all we care about is his rapid recovery. I'm a member of the Board of Governors of the American Jewish Committee. I'm also the co-chair of our Warsaw office, which covers 7 countries. And we all grapple with the same issues of anti-Semitism, the interests of the Jewish people, the rights of people of all faiths to live free from discrimination. And these are all principles addressed in Nostra Aetate. As a side note, I'm a graduate of Georgetown University, so I do have some background in Jesuit education and the cura personalis, the education of the mind and the heart of the whole person, which is so central to your teachings. You have a tough act to follow. We just came from the Gregorian American College, where your young seminarians are real stars. And with that, I will turn the program over to tonight's speakers.
Thank you very much. Very distinguished audience, dear friends. It's with great joy that I'm back in a way here tonight. I was the director of the Cardinal Beer Center, and many faces are known tonight here, so it's wonderful. It's a very good feeling to be back. Now it's my honorable task to introduce our 2 speakers, which in fact they do not need so much of introduction. Let me start with Rabbi David Rosen, former Chief Rabbi of Ireland, International Director of Interreligious Affairs of the AGC, we heard the American Jewish Committee, Director of the Heilbronn Institute for International Interreligious Understanding, past Chairman of the IJCIC, the International Jewish Committee for Interreligious Consultations. Rabbi Rosen is a member of the Chief Rabbinate of Israel's Commission for Interreligious Dialogue and serves on the Council of the Religious Institutions of the Holy Land. He is an international president of the Religions for Peace and a member of the Board of Directors of the King Abdullah International Center for Interreligious and Intercultural Dialogue, established by the King of Saudi Arabia as well as the governments of Austria and Spain, together with the Holy See. I stop here. I want to still mention that he has been made Rabbi Rosen a Knight of the Order of St. Gregory the Great by Pope Benedict XVI. So, Knight David Rosen, Knight Rabbi.
Why is this night different from all other nights?
And I would like to present to you Father Giulio Michelini, Franciscan friar, professor of New Testament exegesis, and the dean, also dean of the Theological Institute of Assisi. Holds a doctorate in biblical theology from the Pontifical Gregorian University, very good, and has studied at the Bat Kol Institute in Jerusalem, also very good. Author of several scientific articles and books on biblical topics, especially on the Gospel of Matthew. I would like to mention here also in particular the publication together with Marco Morselli of 3 volumes of the very much noted Bible of Friendship, where Jewish and Christian scholars comment on passages from Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, published when? Yes, 2019 to 2021, very recent. Without further ado, so the methodology will be I present questions and we shift, we vary who will answer first. Let me, so the first question posed first to Rabbi Rosen. What are Christian-Jewish relations? What makes them so significant? What inspired you to consider them a priority in your life?
So I suppose I need to tell you a little bit of a personal story. I got involved in interfaith relations as a very rather ridiculously young rabbi of what was the largest Orthodox Jewish congregation in South Africa, maybe the world at the time, during the era of apartheid. So and apartheid was an evil system which automatically should have been opposed by everyone for whom the biblical heritage is important. And it was important for me to not only be engaged in bringing people together at that time in South Africa, but also to help my community be engaged with other communities at the time. And one of the few ways you could do it without immediately running foul of the government and being kicked out of the country or being thrown into jail was through engagement with religions, which generally the authorities were rather nervous about touching. So I went around hawking my wares with the different religious communities, and I had especially close, immediate resonance and a close collaboration with Catholic colleagues. I confess that until that moment I'd probably never met a Catholic priest. I'd probably never met a sincere believer from any other religion. And it never actually had occurred to me to consider what other religions of the world means, or, if you like, in other terms, what is God saying to us in the existence of these different approaches. But I was very strongly connected to a priest who became the Director of Education in South Africa, to the Bishop of Cape Town, and to the Cardinal of Cape Town at the time, very, very quickly. And I found them to be wonderful people. And I found them that we had so many values that we shared, and that it was important, if I was going to be true to those values, to work to others that share them in order to advance them. I also discovered that, as wonderful as they were pretty ignorant about me. And I expected that Catholics, and I expected all Christians, who surely they come out of Judaism, so they should know what Judaism really is, and they should know what Jews really are. And I was amazed to discover that wasn't the case. And even nice people, they had strange and some ideas. So I realized it was really important to engage them. But you know what? I realized as I met them that I was pretty ignorant about them too. And I had all misconceptions. And as I love to say, if I wanted to be understood, I needed to understand. So I realized as I got involved in this, not only in the South African context, but universally, how important it was to have this interreligious engagement to overcome prejudice and bigotry, to promote the values that we share. But let me add just one other thing. And in a sense, that's a much more personal aspect, because I think everybody can understand what I've said until now, and everybody could agree with it, and that's enough for interfaith relations. But for me, there is something more than that. As I encountered these wonderful people, not only did it lead me to start thinking about what it means that other religions exist, but also it led me to suddenly realize how limited my conceptions of religion and spirituality had been. I'm not sure I ever thought of others religiously seriously. Then it occurred to me how ridiculous it is to think that you can encapsulate the totality of the divine in one religious tradition. God is more than any one religion. God is more than all religions. Any religion is only a partial glimpse of the divine in the world. And if, as our religions teach, we encounter the divine presence in the human encounter, each and every one creating the divine image, then when you encounter the other in the sense of God's presence in her or his life, you encounter God beyond the limits of your own heritage and tradition. And we can never know all traditions and all aspects. If we're going to be really rooted within our traditions, then we have to be profoundly committed within that context that limits your access to it. But you can have these glimpses of the divine through the encounter beyond it. So I was hooked on it. I am hooked on it. I'm hooked on interfaith relations because it's critical to overcoming prejudice and bigotry, and you can never rest on your laurels. And everything that we've achieved with Catholic-Jewish relations, which is so stunning, can never be taken for granted. There are always new generations that we've got to work on and we've got to have to address. And of course, there are the values we have, and we've always got to work together for those values, for the advancement of peace, of justice, of human dignity, of the integrity of the family, and so on and so forth. But I'm hooked on it for its own sake, For me, it is a wonderful spiritual enrichment. And I find that particularly actually within the Jewish Catholic encounter, because I find that Catholics very often have a better understanding or better empathy for Jewishness than very often other denominations. They can understand the inextricable relation. I find they can understand better than most other Christians that I encounter this rather remarkable combination, intricate intertwining of people, faith, religion, culture, language, land, all intertwined with one another. And then last not least, 1.3 billion Catholics in the world? That's not insignificant. I mean, Israel didn't establish diplomatic relations with the Vatican simply because it wanted to be, to sing Kumbaya. This was because it understood realpolitik. And Catholic attitudes affect how Christians see Jews in different parts of the world. It affects whether Jews feel comfortable or not. Today, the Catholic Church, certainly in many parts of the world, is the most important ally in the battle against anti-Semitism. 3 popes have declared anti-Semitism to be a sin against God and man. In my opinion, Benedict gave the most important pedagogic message when he said anti-Semitism is actually an attack against Christianity, and that anti-Semitism is assault against Christianity, against the Christian faith. So it's strategically should be obvious for us to be deeply involved in this area, aside from all the personal advantages that I'm privileged to get from it.
Thank you, David. Thank you also for the passion. Fra Giulio.
So that's
What
my
is
turn.
significant?
So I also want to start from the personal point of view, but I also want to ask you pardon for my bad English, and I'm very embarrassed and confused to be here and to have on my side David Rosen, and so I hope you will understand what I say. So from a personal point of view, I study and I teach New Testament, the Bible, and I'm convinced that you cannot understand it perfectly, deeply, if you don't need it, you not love Judaism. So I had a chance when I was young to attend the Pontifical Biblical Institute and the Gregorian University. I remember that I attended many courses, especially one on the Akedat Yitzhak, which is the binding of Isaac. And it was a very good teacher. But then I was invited by Joseph Sievers and another friend teacher, Massimo Grilli, to attend summer courses in Jerusalem that were held by rabbis and teachers and scholars of the Hebrew University. And it was quite completely different. I also had to argue with them sometimes. And it's not so as having been taught by Christians. If you go to school by Jews, for a Christian, for a Catholic, you have to accept another perspective and you have to trust them. So I think that changed my life completely. And from that time on, I think that we all have to love Judaism, the Jews, because through the love for Judaism we can love more our religion and Jesus as well. I also want to say that looking back over the years, I recognize that I have been inspired by a Franciscan who lived in the Middle Ages. His name is Nicholas of Lyra, who was very important for the exegesis and interpretation of the Bible. He was the one who made the shift from symbolic interpretation to the literal interpretation. And in his commentaries, he always quotes Rashi. He studied by the Jews, with the Jews, and learned a lot with the Jews. So I think that now I am in debate with Nicholas of Lyra, and in conclusion, from another point of view, which is not so personal, but I think it has to do with the church and with the world, the relation between Jews and Christians are important not only for the Catholic Church, but for the Jews, we'll see that, and indeed for all the world. Christians and Jews can work together in a dialogue. And it's not only a duty, but also an opportunity that God offers now to us. Okay.
Thank you very much, Fra Giulio. I have been given a great deal of a good number of questions. So what I will introduce from this point is, let's say we try to limit the answering time to 3-4 minutes. Otherwise, I'm concerned about the second half of this evening. The next question is a very Catholic one. It's about church texts and documents that we Catholics like to quote and to interpret. And we go back here to 1965 and Nostra Aetate. It's considered a turning point in Catholic-Jewish relations, this document produced by the Vatican II Council. What are the most positive results? What challenges do these relations face today? Do you feel reasonably assured that there can be no turning back, or do you see threats to these relations in the present world situation? Fra Giulio.
Thank you. I think there will never be a turning back, because Nostra Aetate is part of the most important documents of the Catholic Church. It's inside the documents of the Vatican Council. So it would be a disaster if you would say that we cannot listen and apply what is written in Nostra Aetate. And then I think that there are many effects that you can see, that we can see. And so Nostra Aetate made history between Christians and Jews. First of all, in that document, there is a recognition of the Jewish roots of Christianity. And especially with the third quest on the historical Jesus, we know that Jesus was a Jew, and we have learned through this history research to learn and to recognize the importance of Judaism. Second, the condemnation of anti-Semitism. So on the other hand, I want to recall that Jewish scholars like, for example, such as Amy Jill Levine, have taught an academic course at the Pontifical Biblical Institute as a consequence of Nostra Aetate. It would have been possible before to have a Jewish scholar, a Jewish professor in a Catholic university in Italy, in this country. The same scholar has published, together with other Jewish scholars, a commentary on the New Testament. And I consider this a good result of the Nostra Aetate. So these are signs and proof that there will be never a turning back on what are the achievements of Nostra Aetate.
Thank you, Fra Giulio. Rabbi Rosen, what's Nostra Aetate? What does it mean? What are the most positive results? What challenges come from Nostra Aetate today?
So Nostra Aetate, as you have both said, is, and certainly as Father Michelini has emphasized, is really represents a revolution in terms of the approach of the Catholic Church towards Jews and Judaism, and subsequently to Israel as well, even though that is still something that has to be teased out a little bit more. It's still yet to be resolved. And I think we must pay tribute to the Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews that Father Norbert is so central to, and especially for the latest document of 2015, where his fingerprints loom very large, of the gifts and the calling of God, which summarizes this remarkable transformation. There is no question that the revolution has taken place on the Olympian Heights. No question. Can it be reversed? I don't think. It's really not for me. That is more a question for Catholics to address. I don't think it can be reversed. I think, as Father Giulio mentioned, I don't think that's feasible. But it can be both minimized, and it can even be not given significant attention. By minimized, I mean that there have been princes of the Church, one very prominent cardinal in the United States of the previous generation, no longer alive, who, for a while, when John Paul II was basically dying, and there was a kind of a hiatus there, was actually saying that Nostra Aetate is actually only a pastoral document, and therefore not a binding document. And it actually took Pope Benedict's statements to really clarify that when talking about the covenant, the eternal covenant, it's not just talking about the Abrahamic covenant, it's talking about the Sinai covenant, and to emphasize that. But I think that illustrates that there can be those conservative elements that can question the degree of the significance of the magisterium's teaching on these issues. But I think a much more serious, I don't think that's a very serious danger, I think a much more serious danger is a present reality in which illustrates something very important. And I think the United States of America is really a good example. You can have great changes on the Olympian heights, but if you do not have the sociological conditions suitable, they can remain up there and don't necessarily translate down to the grassroots. What's really remarkable about the United States is that you have two vibrant communities. Jewish and Catholic community, obviously the sizes are very, very different, but they're still two very vibrant communities that see themselves as totally integral parts of the United States of America, but are minorities, and have common interests, and live closely. There, the sociological conditions are perfect for the internalization of those Olympian changes. And we are the beneficiaries of that. And the friendships that my colleague, Rabbi Marans, who directs interfaith relations in the United States, has with bishops and cardinals, I would say the closeness of those relationships are very few in the world, very few for that kind of quality. And it's not just him. We benefit from the fact that it's really across the United States of America where this transformation has been internalized. But there are parts of the world where there are not vibrant Jewish communities, and that's the majority of the world. And there are parts of the world where Jews don't even feature on the radar screen, and that's a significant part of the world, where thinking is still very often pre-conciliar, before the Second Vatican Council, and where I have met bishops who do not know the content of Nostra Aetate, section 4, let alone the guidelines on Nostra Aetate, the notes on preaching and teaching of catechesis, the church and racism, the 2015 document on the gifts and the calling of God cannot be revoked. They don't know about them. So there is an educational challenge, and it is poor Father Norbert continues to suffer from my nagging on this issue, and others, because I think we have the obligation to nag on this issue, because this issue is an educational task which we still have to address. Let me take this opportunity to acknowledge his fair comment that there is also a responsibility on the Jewish side. And the Jewish side needs to be able to teach more effectively about this wonderful revolution and its content. And there's still plenty of places in the Jewish world where there is still profound anti-Christian prejudice. But I would argue that the anti-Christian prejudice that exists is far more sociological than anything else. It comes out of our historical experience. And the more Jews encounter the Christians who really respect them and genuinely love them, the more we will be able to reciprocate with that respect and love. I know that's not fair, but it's historically a reflection of the fact that our relationship was not a balanced one. And it's clear where the power was, and it's clear where the victim was in this context, and that puts a greater onus on the church. I can't be sure that if the shoe was on the other foot, we would have behaved differently. I can't, and I must confess that. But the reality is, the healing has to be done theologically on the Christian and on the Catholic side, the Christian side, in order to be able to get that reciprocity, which must come from the Jewish side.
Thank you, Rabbi Rosen. Let's continue nagging. Do Jews and Christians have different expectations from the Jewish-Christian dialogue? And what are these expectations today?
So yes, I don't think that I'm at all typical of Jewish engagement in the Jewish-Catholic dialogue, but I think I'm getting less unusual. I think there are more and more Jews who really want that relationship on a genuine basis of spiritual mutual understanding and enrichment. But it's still a minority position. For most Jews, the most important thing in the Jewish-Christian relationship and in all interfaith relationship is enlisting our interlocutors and partners in combating prejudice, bigotry, hatred, and violence against Jews. In other words, in the war against anti-Semitism. And that must not be minimized. But that's not good enough for a relationship. Fighting against something bad is not good enough to promote a healthy relationship. A healthy relationship must be based not on mutual respect, but also on mutual enrichment. So I think that in this relationship, the lack of equivalency is also a theological reflection, and also basically a character. Christianity, as indeed Father Giulio said, Christianity cannot be true to itself without understanding Judaism. Indeed, John Paul II said Judaism is intrinsic to our identity as Jews, as we're no other. So you cannot be a good Christian. This is what Christian popes say, not to me. You cannot be a good Christian if you do not understand Judaism. Now, I agree that Jews should understand Christianity, but Jews don't have to understand Christianity in order to understand who they are as Jews. And that means there's an asymmetry in the relationship. So by definition, Christians come to it as a more theological engagement, the Jews who come to it as a more sociological engagement.
Thank you, Rabbi Rosen. Fra Giulio, what are the expectations?
I think I agree with Rob Rosen. I think the expectation of the, as far as I can understand, from my side, is to have a greater, wider knowledge of Judaism, and you should take this a mitzvah. You should consider to help us to know Judaism better. You said from a sociological point of view, which is closing the relationships, friendship, because I know there is in this country, as far as I know, a lot of interest in the Judaic world, not only in the historical Judaism, but in the actual this time Judaism. I want to be clear to the second point. Surely, you know that our expectations now have nothing to do with the issue of conversions. I want to be clear on this, because on the last book of Cardinal Casper, it's clearly written that one time we had a history of, unfortunately, forced baptisms. But I want to tell you a story. I remember that one of my teachers at Hebrew University used to come every year to spend his holidays in Tuscany. And he used to say to me that he never dared to enter into a church. And maybe he knew what was inside the church, because we are in Italy, we were in Tuscany. But he had a great fear of what he has received, a history of forced baptism and conversions. So I want to clarify this point, quoting Cardinal Casper. In his latest book, he writes, "I always point out that the Catholic Church knows now no institutional and organized mission to the Jews." So I think that our expectation is friendship. Surely we hope that we can help each other to know God better, but I think that now is the time that we don't need to talk to conversions anymore. Okay.
Thank you, Fra Giulio. The next question is anti-Semitism, is around anti-Semitism. It's rebounding in quite a few places in the world in a very disconcerting fashion. So the old anti-Semitic tropes, discredited by official church documents, are coming back, such in forms of criticism of Israel by certain so-called woke minority groups. What can we do to combat this very dangerous phenomenon? What has proven to be successful?
I don't know what about your country or Israel. I know that in this country there might be a return of anti-Semitism, but I don't think that it is worrying at all. What we can do, as I said before, is to foster a more in-depth knowledge of Judaism, and I want to thank the friends of the Italian Bishops' Conference. Maybe you know that this is the first Bishops' Conference in the world who issued 16 fact sheets, which are the result of a work between the Italian Bishops' Conference and the Union of the Jewish communities in this country, that will be used for teaching religion, Catholic religion, in the school. And they will be used, these sheets, in order to produce and write books for the teaching of Catholic religion. My concern is not on anti-Semitism. I'm more concerned for anti-Judaism. Maybe it's not so clear the difference. Let me quote Hannah Arendt, who wrote in 1951 a pamphlet on anti-Semitism, and she poses anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism as entirely independent phenomena. She wrote that anti-Semitism, a secular 19th century ideology, and religious Jew hatred, inspired by the mutually hostile antagonism of two conflicting creeds, are obviously not the same. So we must work as a church on anti-Judaism, I think, to especially two questions. The first one, the way we consider some groups inside the New Testament books as the Pharisees. I know that David Rosen, together with Lisa and Joseph, have organized a great encounter here in the Gregorian University for research on the Pharisees. We have learned that we must distinguish the Pharisees. For example, I know that on the Talmud there are 7 kinds of Pharisees. We don't know exactly which one was the Pharisees that encountered Jesus. Then we have concern on the way we talk of Judas, one of the apostles of Jesus. And we also are concerned for the way we talk of the death of Jesus. But I want to close my comment with a prayer that we did this morning in my church. I will say that in English. We prayed singing, "Sweet Jesus, Judge of the world, unjustly condemned to death, we sinners have judged you. Noi peccatori ti abbiamo giudicato." So I think that in our Catholic self-understanding, there is no more the idea of deicism, the fact that Jews have killed Jesus. The Church, from this point of view, I think has made a great mistake, but this mistake is not present anymore. Okay.
So, I thank you, Father Giulio. I wish I was as optimistic as you. First of all, let me join you in congratulating the Italian Bishops' Conference. I think this thing that is done together with the Italian Federation of Jewish Communities is really wonderful. I hope it will serve to inspire many other communities around the world. If we're already congratulating on documents that have just come out within this last week, the Australian Bishops' Commission issued together with the Jewish community in Australia a wonderful document that should be known to the world and should be translated in different languages for advancing Catholic-Jewish relations. The problem, again, I don't think is so much on the Olympian Heights, but I think it is much more then translated into the action. And you know that the conference that Professor Sievers organized at our instigation, but he must be given the full credit for it, and the wonderful book that was produced.
With the preface of the Pope. Yeah.
So this is really, let's just illustrate this as an example. I mean, Pope Francis is a wonderful man. And he's done, in some ways, such amazing things, both for the Church and for Catholic-Jewish relations. But this conference was motivated by a desire that I think is still relevant to help the Church internalize its own documents and understand them. Because in the notes, the guidelines on Nostra Aetate, and in the notes on preaching and catechesis, there's precisely the warning that you say. Put things in context. Don't talk about the Jews or the Pharisees or a Jew or Pharisee in generalizations. It's okay to talk of those Jews or those Pharisees. Of course, the New Testament itself indicates that there were Pharisees who were supporters of Jesus within it. And nobody mentions that in certain areas and different kinds of Pharisees, as there were different kinds of Jews. And of course, the most important thing is to communicate to people. These were debates within the family.
Yes.
These were arguments within the family, which of course most Christians don't internalize today because they don't think of themselves in relation to the family. Now, on the one side, Pope Francis is fantastic in terms of emphasizing our familial relationship. On the other hand, he does not seem to have internalized these sensitivities, and that's why we went ahead with this particular conference. And the interesting thing is, there was this wonderful text which I think was written, so actually I should acknowledge specifically in relation to this conference Father Kolarczyk, because this was done together with the Pontifical Biblical Institute.
Sorry, I didn't
and more than that, if I'm not mistaken, he was the one who prepared the text for the Pope to be able to read out at the audience that concluded this conference. Now, what's really interesting is the Pope did not read the text. He had the text, and it was brought, but he didn't read it. I'm not sure that he did read it at all. I don't know, even though it's been referred to. I'll tell you something funny. At the end of this thing, with the papal audience, you know what's called a private audience isn't very private. And then you line up and you have an opportunity for maybe a sentence. So I said to him in my broken Italian, "Greetings from this Pharisee." He said, no, you're not a Pharisee. You're a good man. So what have I achieved this whole thing?
That's because of the...
So this is the challenge. Okay, so you could say he's into his advanced 80s. This is actually the past, but I don't know whether that's true. I think there's still a challenge today of the internalization.
David, the problem is we use that in our language, in Italian, and you know the Pope has Italian roots, and so we say in Italian, you are a Pharisee, meaning that you are a hypocrite.
Yes, and that's not just you. It's used. We had a situation in America not long ago where also a presidential candidate was using it. But in America, you can point it out to him and he can say, I didn't realize it. I'm sorry. I didn't intend to do anything. There are very few places in the world where you can do that so effectively. So that's still a significant challenge in terms of it. Sure. I agree with you that kind of anti-Semitism or anti-Judaism is not lethal. It's problematic, but it's not lethal. There are parts of the world where there's lethal anti-Semitism. And in that regard, in most parts, where Jewish communities do have a relationship with the Catholic Church has been wonderful. I think in particular of Hungary, where the Church has been really a powerful supporter in a struggle against anti-Semitism, and occasions also in France and other places, and here in Italy too. So I definitely think that the Catholic Church is part today, and this is, if you like, the essence of the revolution, is today no longer part of the problem, it's part of the solution. That's definitely the case. But that doesn't mean that the fact that we've been able to resolve at least things at the Olympian Heights have necessarily been translated grassroots adequately. It also doesn't mean that there aren't other sources of anti-Semitism. There are very serious sources, and I think we need to do more to enlist our partnership with the Catholic Church to be able to address these. And I think, again, I don't know whether I mentioned it before. No, I mentioned it at the college together, I think, with seminarians. Sorry, I'm getting old and the day's long, and I can't remember everything. But there was this remarkable pedagogy of Pope Benedict, who, when he was in Auschwitz, basically described Nazism's attempt at genocide of the Jews as not just an attack on the Jews, but an attack on Christianity, on the very taproot, the foundation of Christianity. Now, whether you accept that historical analysis or not doesn't matter. If you are teaching that anti-Semitism is actually an assault against your own very identity, that's an enormously powerful message. And that needs to be more widely disseminated.
The next question, which in a way you anticipated already in your answers, is about Pope Francis. And it's, of course, it was formulated before we knew about the Pope's hospitalization. The question is, how do you assess the record of Pope Francis in terms of Jewish-Christian relations? I would like to propose, given the current circumstances, let's transform this question into, are there particular characteristics of Pope Francis' contribution to Jewish-Christian relations? Can we name some, David?
So let me pick up again with regards to a certain illustration of Pope Francis. His visit to the synagogue in Rome, which was of course the third papal visit to the synagogue in Rome, was probably the most amazingly successful, at least as far as a Jewish community was there. I was at the visit by Pope Benedict XVI, and I thought Pope Benedict's visit was very good, but the atmosphere with Pope Francis was nothing. It was far more of a festival. And the Jewish community was just blissfully responding to him in that case. The message of his presentation, with all due respect to whoever was responsible for it, was very, very basic. Very basic. There was nothing theologically very significant in his presentation, as opposed to Pope Benedict's presentation, which was theologically very rich, and John Paul II's speech, which was revolutionary. But he had one special message in this, and it resonated so powerfully with the Jewish congregation gathered there. We are one family. That was the message. We are one family. The Jewish congregation loved it. And it's genuine on his part. He really means it. But let me tell you now another story. Sorry it's taking on, but I think the stories are interesting. I've been very involved recently, AJC has been passionately involved in the development of interfaith relations in the Gulf, and specifically in the Abraham Family House. A most amazing initiative where you have a very beautiful church, an aspiring mosque, and a lovely synagogue all on one campus. Beautiful campus. This structure was the result of the visit of Pope Francis to Abu Dhabi in 2019, where he met with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, where they signed a document of human fraternity. This was very much an initiative actually coming from Al-Azhar, but very much welcomed by Pope Francis. And Pope Ahmed Al-Tayyib, the Grand Imam, suggested that to celebrate this remarkable historic development, which really is historic in terms of the Catholic-Muslim relationship, that they should build a mosque and a church. And the Pope said yes. And Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, now the president of the UAE, said, he said to them, and what about the Jews? What about a synagogue? Of course, said the Pope, you must have a synagogue. And then Ahmed Al-Tayyib said, yes, let's have a synagogue. First, aside from the fact that it's remarkable that an Arab Muslim leader is the one to be able to emphasize building the synagogue, why didn't the Pope suggest it? Why didn't the Pope think of it? I'll tell you what I think. I think because he thinks of us as family, actually, without articulating it as such, he sees us as a branch of Christianity. He sees us as basically the roots of his own identity as a Christian. And that's what he means by family. Now, that's in no way negative from his perspective. It's totally sincere, genuine, and positive. But it means he does not give us enough integrity in terms of what we are and in terms of what we can offer, what our mission, what our vision, what our contribution can be. And I think it comes out of a certain background of not being, both in terms of not being European, for worse and for better. I think comes out of his own particular context. And does it matter? That's the big question. The truth of the matter is that, generally speaking, probably not, because the vast majority of the world knows that he's a genuine friend of the Jewish people, and he does have these amazing friendships which are really genuine, And Rabbi Desenyi was joking with me that he mentioned in recent times they built so many synagogues in Rome that one place where they need one is in St. Peter's, because all the Jewish friends of the Pope who are turning up every week to be able to see him there, etc. But in the long run, I think it does matter. In the long run, just as I think when he uses the term Pharisee and Jew pejoratively, and he doesn't mean it to anyone today, he doesn't mean that. The problem is not just with some priest in Bogota or somewhere who says, well, if the Pope talks like that about the Pharisees or Jew, why shouldn't I? The problem is also the whole question of internalizing an authentic respect for the independent religious and theological autonomy of Jews and Judaism.
Fra Giulio.
Thank you. I will think about it. And I want to quote the preface that the Pope wrote for the books that we wrote together with Marco and 120 scholars, rabbis from all over the world. I think it's the first time in the history where 3 books are written by 120 people together, 60 Christians and 60 Jews. I know there are some experiments in the United States of commentaries with 2 voices, but this is a great result of the dialogue, and we have already a translation for the Portuguese language, but we don't have any translation in English. So if someone wants to pay for the translation, we would be very happy. The Pope says at the beginning of the Torah Nevi'im Ketuvim, I am very well that we have behind us 19 centuries of Christian anti-Judaism, and that a few decades of dialogue are very small in comparison. However, in recent times, many things have changed and still others are changing. We need to work more intensely to ask for forgiveness and to repair the damage caused by misunderstanding. So I think if there are still some misunderstanding, I believe what you say, and we will work on it. Okay? Thank you.
The next question regards the state of Jewish-Christian dialogue in the respective countries. For Rabbi Rosen, we decided you should talk about Israel. But Fra Giulio, how would you qualify the state of Jewish-Christian?
So first of all, I want to say that I miss the Jews. In my town where I live in Perugia, there are no Jews. No one. Maybe one, but you can find them. And there are only 15,000 Jews in this country, so it's very difficult. And if you have to meet them, you have to go to more?
Yeah.
Less?
No, in the whole country, more.
In Rome? 30,000. Thank you. 30,000. So Marco, you made a mistake, and he gave me the data, and so okay.
So for a Roman Jew, Rome is the whole of the Jewish community.
Maybe not all of them are out really as Jews.
So the double. Okay. Anyway, that's such a minimum number compared to the Italians, and so obviously not always, not everywhere we can do the dialogue together. For example, as I said in Perugia, where I live in Assisi Bernardo Jews. In fact, the few Jews in this country might find difficult to intervene in the cultural debate. I have an example of something that was written in one of the most important newspapers last week concerning a harsh criticizing toward Abraham. No one replied, just one rabbi, but I thought that it would have been more responses from the Jews. As far as Italy is concerned, I just want to remember Camaldoli, which is a great experience for more than 20 years. Jews and Christians meet to deepen the dialogue. The Cardinal Bea Center, the Office for the Dialogue of the Italian Bishops' Conference, the Jewish-Christian Friendships Groups with Marco Cassuto, chaired by Marco, whose groups are present in many Italian towns. I also want to remind that several Italian publishing houses not only La Giuntina or Morasha from Milan, I mean, not only the Jewish ones, but many Italian Christian Catholic publishers publish many titles useful for the dialogue. And finally, I want to say that in this country, yes, the dialogue is very important because we have Rome here. And so we have to keep with all our energies and the forces we have to work on this.
David.
So you think you've asked me a simple question, Philip, but it's actually very complicated. Let's first of all appreciate that the vast majority of Israelis have not come from modern Western pluralistic societies. They have not even come from democratic societies, the vast majority of them. That's why Israel as a democracy is such an amazing miracle. And that's why, in my opinion, last week's civil resistance, which was moderately successful, was so remarkable, an incredible testimony to the Israeli people. But the vast majority have come from Central Eastern European countries or from Muslim countries, which were not democratic societies. And they've come into a situation of political, military, social, economic tension that could have torn a mature democracy into pieces. And it's an amazing thing that despite it all, it still is able to flourish. With all the problems that we can see recently are some very, very threatening ones. But most Israelis have never met a modern Christian. Now that sounds strange to you. We have the Wanderlust in our blood, so we always love to travel. But when we travel abroad, we tend to meet non-Jews as non-Jews, not as modern Christians. And therefore the images for the vast majority of Israelis are still taken from the tragic past. In all honesty, the average Israeli thinks of a Christian as someone who doesn't want to do us harm, certainly still wants to steal our soul, despite Father Giulio's important comment about the fact that Cardinal Kasper's book, and mentioned also in the Commission's 2015 document, about there being no mission to the Jews. So there is still a suspicion with regards to Christian intent that exists within that society, within our Israel. Secondly, you have to bear in mind that the vast majority, that the Christian community is Arab. Now, the vast majority are within Israel and are loyal citizens of the State of Israel and want to be understood by the Jewish majority, but they are still part of an Arab society, and Israel is still a society in conflict. And therefore there is, if you like, an added suspicion of the whole question of Arab attitudes. Incidentally, that has also led to the fact that Arab seminarians, getting back now to the Catholic Church, who have been trained and have been part of the Archdiocese of Jerusalem, generally have gone to the college in Bethlehem, in Beit Jala, generally within a Palestinian milieu, where there they do not teach the teachings of the Magisterium Nostretati and other dogmas. Not forget them. They do not teach them because it's politically problematic. So one's got to therefore understand that political difficulty. There is a seminary, which I don't know what you think about this movement, but it's the one seminary in the Holy Land that is teaching all these documents to seminarians and graduates, and that is the Redemptoris Mater Seminary of the Neo-Catechumenal Way. Interesting.
Also the Franciscan one.
Oh, excuse me, that's true. I should forget about the Franciscans. That was a big mistake of me. But the vast, okay. So, in other words, at any rate, what I've illustrated here is there is a political dimension as well in that context. But despite those limitations, things are continuously improving educationally. We now have more university courses that deal with Christianity than before. There is now a center also in Haifa that's opened up also that's particularly focusing upon Christianity within the northern part of Israel where the vast majority of Christians are. And there are even institutes like the Blickl Institute in Efrat, which is therefore in the occupied territories, which is actually training Jewish scholars, women and men, to be able to understand other religions and other heritage. So there are some positive steps. Recently, because of the political difficulties and certain appointments of people to positions who have attitudes which I find totally contrary to authentic Jewish ethical and moral teaching, But the result is that certain extremist elements that have always been there have come to the conclusion that they have some kind of permission to behave badly and even violently towards people who are not like them. And not just Christians, but Muslims and even other kinds of Jews. And I hope that we will see more effective law enforcement of this area. But as bad as these things are, certainly nobody has been killed by these actions, and nobody has yet been hospitalized. I mean, that's not good enough if you got beaten up in any of these attempts, but nevertheless, we had a meeting here on our mission with one of the most important personalities in the Secretariat of State, who said he's very concerned with the situation in the Middle East, problem of Christianity, what's happening in Iraq, problem what's happening in Lebanon, problem what's happening in Syria, and he's also very concerned about what's happening now in Israel and in Jerusalem. I'm also concerned, but the equivalency is nonsense. Christians are being butchered and slaughtered in Iraq and in Lebanon and Syria. That's not the situation in Jerusalem or in Israel. So yes, it's a problem, we need to address it, but we need also to keep things in perspective.
Thank you, David. We want to stay a little longer with Israel. Let's talk about the theology of the land, the theology of the promised land. So at this point, I would like to split the questions a little bit. I will start with you, Fra Giulio. Biblical promise is important also for Christians. So how does the Church's new theology on the Jewish people view the state of Israel? And how do political developments impact this view?
Okay, this is certainly the most sensitive and the most difficult question of this meeting, I'm sure. And from a theological point of view, I'm just talking on behalf of myself. I think I'm not sure that after the Second Vatican Council and after Nostra Aetate, there is a reflection of this theological reflection of the state of Israel. As far as I know, there is no official theology of the Catholic Church on this so important issue. In the United States, instead, the American evangelical Christianity has a theology of the state Israel, which is called the Christian Zionism, which is quite different from the Catholic position. So, second, I'm not sure that it's so easy to deduce a clear theology of Eretz Israel from the New Testament texts. I know that through all the New Testament, the promises made to Abraham are confirmed, and one of the most important promises, the land. But there are different interpretations of these passages that you can find in Catholic documents, such as the Pontifical Biblical Document on the Interpretation of the Church, which sees the land of Israel as a promise in the New Testament seen in a future horizon, not, material, but in a eschatological horizon. So, in conclusion, I find among Catholic theologians neither a clear or sure theology of the Jewish people nor of the Promised Land. But since I am a theologian, I want to say that as far as I'm concerned, I firmly believe that Israel has the right to have the land. And I consider the miracle of Zionism, what happened, that people, Jewish people from all over the world, have received a land where they can live in peace and where they try to live the Torah. So that's what I think, but I'm going behind the official theology of the Church.
Thank you, Fra Giulio. So David, the question to you. Do you believe that the State of Israel has religious significance? If so, what significance do you think it should have for Catholics? And does this mean that the State of Israel should be above criticism for Jews especially?
So it's easy for me to answer the last question first. So the answer is absolutely not. Nothing is above criticism in the human world. The only thing that transcends criticism, and even that is a bit silly to talk about it in that sense, is the divine. So whenever we see, and even within the Torah, Abraham criticizes God when he thinks he's done something wrong. So it's the conscience of what is right and wrong that must lead us in terms of whether we criticize or whether we don't criticize. And Israel, you know Israel Zangwill's funny comment that Jews are like everyone else except more so. And so the state of Israel is like every state, maybe more so in some ways, and states make mistakes, and they should be criticized. They should be criticized. The theological significance of the state of Israel for the Catholic Church is what Professor Gavin da Costa has been devoting a lot of time, and had a very important conference here in Rome quite recently that we as AJC were also involved in that conference. And that's pushing the Catholic Church to try to take this issue more seriously. And the basic argument is, if you say, as the Catholic Church now says, that the covenant between God and the Jewish people is eternal covenant, never broken and never to be broken, and you recognize that's rooted in the biblical promise of the relationship to the people and the land, then surely that must have some theological significance. But the church still has to address it. And of course, there's no question that political factors influence and have an effect in that regard. But if you ask me, does the state of what is also important is that the theological documents, the documents coming out of the Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews, and a number of statements by popes, have acknowledged that the state of Israel is an expression of divine fidelity to his covenant, of God's love of the Jewish people. They have acknowledged that. They have not gone one step further and say, what does that mean for the Catholic Church? But we should acknowledge that fidelity. So for me, that is a powerful testimony of enormous religiosity. In actual fact, let me tell you that I had a conversation with Cardinal Ratzinger before he became Pope Benedict XVI. He was in Jerusalem, and it was a very illuminating conversation for me about his theology on so many different issues. And at one stage he said to me, anything that has, because you are our roots, anything that has theological significance for you must have theological significance for us. I said, you know, Your Eminence, there are many of us that think that there's religious significance of the state of Israel. He said to me, of course I know. We have not yet, he said these words, we have not yet fully teased out all the implications of Nostra Aetate. It was a fascinating thing for him to say at that particular time. He said many other interesting things. At any rate, for me, obviously the state of Israel is a testimony to God's promise. Does that mean that it cannot fail? Absolutely not. We failed twice. There is no guarantee that the Third Commonwealth could not collapse too. And if we do not care to behave in a moral, sensitive fashion, especially to the vulnerable, that will happen. It's a terrible challenge for Israel, faced with existential threats to its existence. It's not simple to try to be moral when you're fighting for your existence and for your own survival. But it's a challenge we have to meet. And it's a challenge ultimately, as Ben-Gurion himself said, on which the state will either stand or fall.
Thank you, Rabbi Rosen. We come to our conclusive question. This will be again common to the two of you, and it's taking a look at the future, let's say the immediate future or even on longer term's future. What do you see as prospects? Are there some guidelines that we could identify for the future of Catholic-Jewish relations? David.
I don't know whether I have much to add, Philip. I can just say that I think the responsibilities we mentioned on both sides to do more in terms of education, to move more in terms of internalization, to remember that we can never rest upon our laurels. The Talmud says about Torah study, if you stop it for 1 day, 2 days will leave you. And therefore, if we do not continuously stand on our guard and continuously seek to educate and to emphasize the important values, then we will suffer the consequences. So this is an educational challenge for all of us.
Thank you. David?
I'm happy to end with a quotation from Pope's introduction to our Bible friendship. The Pope says, the best way to communicate is not just talking and discussing, as we do now, but making plans and realizing them together, with all those who have goodwill and mutual respect in friendship. So we have to work together. And so that's what you do, and I know you, and I hope that we will keep on doing this in our countries. And then I want to say that I believe in miracles. So I believe that a miracle is the return of the Jewish people to your country. The miracle of language, Ivrit, which was not spoken for centuries, and return, they kept on talking and using Hebrew. In synagogues, as scholars did with reading Talmud Torah. But now it's a language spoken by millions of Jews. A miracle is a foundation of democratic state, and I believe that there must be the miracle of peace between the Palestinians and the Jews, the Israelis.
Con aiuto di Dio.
Thank you very much.